They say a lot can change in 10 years, but for us, it's been 12 years since we graduated middle school, now knocking on the door of our 30s. Taking this milestone, a reunion for our 8th grade class was organized. I'd received invitations every few years before, but this was my first time attending one. My name is Michael. After graduating middle school, I immediately started working and chose the path of a chef. Because of this, I lost touch with most of my classmates who went on to high school. Meeting classmates after more than a decade, it was only natural that everyone had grown up, and there were those whose faces or names I couldn't recall, those whose faces were familiar but names escaped me, and those I recognized instantly. My middle school days weren't exactly filled with just good memories. Yet seeing everyone now, nostalgia permeated every moment. About 15 minutes past the scheduled start of the reunion, most attendees had arrived, and everyone, drink in hand, was engaged in conversation, waiting for the opening remarks from the organizer, who had been a class representative, Susan. I was alone, observing all of this from the side. "Your kid's in elementary school now, so you finally bought a condo. I got an informal promotion to section chief. Thanks for being there at my dad's funeral." I couldn't say I got promoted to department head. He was so happy about being section chief. I could hear my classmates' conversations. Joy and sorrow, jealousy and envy. Is sharing those experiences what being former classmates is all about, I wonder? The only one not here yet is Mia. "Shall we start?" I heard the voice of Susan, who had been a motherly figure and class representative, and now the organizer of this reunion. I quickly turned on the speaker and handed the microphone to Susan. Then, I ran to close the open entrance door. Despite the restaurant staff being perfectly in place, I couldn't help but bustle around. Even the staff seemed apologetic. It wasn't about being tight-fisted, but my bad habit of doing everything myself was kicking in. It was when I bent over to close the entrance door. I saw, on the other side, the legs of a woman wearing crimson high heels. I involuntarily looked up and found a woman, clad in an expensive-looking dress and wearing model-like makeup, looking down at me. Are you, by any chance, Pua?" It was a remark let slip by Susan about the one participant who hadn't arrived yet that evening. It was Mia. Staring intently at my face, she said, "So, what are you doing there, still as broke as ever?" As I stood there flabbergasted, she snorted with laughter and went inside. The words Mia showered on me about being Pua were passed along like a game of telephone by the classmates who heard them nearby. During this, Mia proceeded further inside, her face tight. Then, out of nowhere, a man's voice rang out. "Don't be late, Pua person number 1. At that voice, Mia's feet stopped dead in their tracks. "What's this Pua person number 1? It was the first time I'd heard it, but it seemed to be about Mia. "Who was that?" The organizer, Susan, immediately yelled into the microphone. The venue fell into a hushed silence. A faint whistling noise came from the speakers. Susan's hand was shaking, causing the microphone she was holding to rub against her collar. Susan was furious. So furious that her hands were shaking. Mia, her face even more tense, continued to move deeper into the venue step by step. Susan regained her composure and made a very socially courteous greeting. For hosting this reunion, we talked Michael into letting us reserve his restaurant that he owns. Susan gestured for the attendees to applaud, and a round of applause broke out. I responded with a slight nod. When I looked up, Mia was in my line of sight. She seemed to have never dreamed that I would own a restaurant and was staring at me with wide eyes in surprise. Since it was my own middle school reunion, I planned to just be one of the guests that day and not worry about work. But it's my restaurant. I found myself peeking into the kitchen, unable to settle down. In the midst of all this, I was summoned by the organizer, Susan. "Stop fussing over things, let's enjoy the reunion." As I hesitated over what to do, the restaurant staff pulled out a chair and urged me to sit. That's when I realized I had been unconsciously avoiding face-to-face conversations with my classmates and had been helping the staff. Well, no use in running away. I steeled myself and joined the table where Susan and the others were sitting. We toasted at Susan's lead. "I thought you might refuse, but thanks for letting us reserve the place." "No big deal, it's business after all." When I responded to Susan, a guy next to me patted my shoulder and said, "Exactly." Then, Susan shook her head vigorously. She said, "Think carefully about what we did to Michael in middle school. What my classmates did to me in middle school. At that time, my family was at the peak of poverty. Due to my dad becoming a guarantor, we fell into debt, and he overexerted himself to repay it, eventually breaking down and becoming unable to work. We moved to a smaller, cheaper apartment, and I transferred schools in the middle of the first term of 8th grade. I transferred to a coeducational class where Susan was the class representative. The new classmates labeled me as poor guy and made fun of me due to our poverty. But hey, we weren't serious, except maybe one person. "We all called you that affectionately," said the guy seated next to Susan. Susan bluntly said that's no excuse. "Right, Michael?" she asked me. I, being asked to agree with Susan, responded with a bitter smile. Susan, being the class rep, bowed her head, saying she should have done more to help everyone. "It's late for regrets, but please forgive us." She bowed deeply, and others followed. I get it, sure, being called Pua was hurtful at first. I was hurt, being ridiculed and made fun of. However, at one point, I decided it was fine. Even if poverty was all I had and no matter how much I was trampled on, I thought it was fine. One day just after the second term started, I was made to run errands after school. Someone said they were thirsty because it was hot on our way back through the park, so we decided to buy cold drinks. I didn't want to spend money, so I had no interest. Yet, I was made to go to the nearby vending machine and get drinks for everyone. All the classmates there each pulled out their own spare change and pushed it onto me. I left my bag and ran to the vending machine. Then, after buying drinks, I returned to the park where everyone was waiting. I had some change left over, enough for one more can of soda. That's when I was told there shouldn't be any extra money, go buy the one that's missing. Reluctantly, I ran to buy the missing one. When I got back from the vending machine, everyone had disappeared from the park. All that was left was me and the ice-cold can of soda in my hand. There was a note in the bag I had left behind. The missing one is the poor person's share. I was more thirsty from running, so I drank it all in one breath. We, sitting around the table, were immersed in solemn reminiscences. Well, even if we reconcile with Michael, there's another person we need to apologize to. Susan glanced at Mia, who was at a distant table. Poor person number one, but she was calling Michael poor earlier too. So, you were the one who said that to Mia. Susan made a fist-pumping gesture. The fact that we made Mia say such a thing, it's our fault at the root, isn't it? I had no idea, but until I transferred, Mia was apparently called the poor one. In 8th grade, her parents had failed in business. So that's what they meant by number one of the poor people. I had always thought that Mia was the one leading, mocking me. But according to Susan, to avoid being the target of mockery in the class, Mia apparently made me the scapegoat. So, she was both the perpetrator and the victim regarding being called poor. Susan felt responsible and had been in touch with Mia. Susan started to talk about Mia. After middle school, Mia worked at a call center while attending night high school, saving her tuition fee. She got a scholarship at a prestigious university and graduated with top grades. Now, she had a general position in a top-tier company. I stopped Susan, who was about to bring her to our table, to apologize. There's no need to make a big deal out of it. I'll talk to number one as the number two pool person later. I had sensed something from Mia's stiff expression when she appeared in this venue. When the feast was in full swing, Susan announced a sea change. That's when I moved to the table where Mia was sitting. I pulled out the chair next to her and asked if I might sit. She gently lifted her hips and nodded. I mean, earlier, it was nostalgic. The pool won. When I said this, she seemed even more apologetic. I'm sorry. You probably think I'm a horrible woman, don't you, addressing you like that? You remembered my name. She quietly nodded in response. I heard about it, from Susan and the others. When I said this, I could tell she tensed up. I'm pool person number 2, and you're pool person number 1. As she was about to passionately object, I stopped her with a hand. Let's drop that topic. You've had your share of hardships since middle school, haven't you? She crinkled her nose, giving a shy laugh. The tense expression she had when she first appeared was completely gone. She was probably nervous and on guard about meeting old classmates who knew her when she was poor. That's why she was probably showing off. But now, looking at her up close, her face seemed kind, without a hint of harshness, enveloping everyone around her. Afterwards, we shared stories of our struggles since middle school and about being poor. But this is such a nice restaurant. Thinking about it, I did well. I want to praise myself. Yes, you deserve praise. She muttered, reaching across the table and picking up my restaurant's original paper coaster from beneath her wine glass with slender fingers. The coaster had an illustration of a 3-leaf plant and the word oxalis written on it. She read the printed characters on the coaster aloud. Oxalis. Oxalis, right. It's wood sorrel, isn't it? You know your stuff. That's correct. It's a perennial herb of the genus Oxalis in the wood sorrel family. Why did you choose wood sorrel? I told her it's because a fairy tale-like story about wood sorrel that I was told as a child has stayed with me. What's the story? Just as I started to explain to her, an announcement from Susan about starting the bingo game resonated through the venue. Bingo cards were distributed, and the venue started to buzz. Susan explained the rules over the microphone. I was watching the situation for a while. Then she tapped my shoulder. Hey, tell me, what was the story? The bingo game started at the same time. Numbers were called, and voices of joy and disappointment rose from the venue. Come on, I can't wait. Well, it's noisy around, come closer, I'll tell you. I was still in the early grades of elementary school. The event at the library my mother took me to turned out to be a reading session for children. Firstly, the reader explained about wood sorrel, the subject of the book, mentioning that wood sorrel, often mistaken for clover, is a wild plant with 3 leaves. The content of the book was an anthropomorphized depiction of this wood sorrel. There were 2 wood sorrel families growing across the road from each other. The family on the left was living in a place with excellent sunlight and good drainage, leading a comfortable life. But the family across the street, they don't get sunlight, and there's no drainage, it's damp. That's right. Moreover, they get stepped on by humans every single day. Saying it hurts, and they cried. I looked at her as she joined in. She also smiled at me. Did you know this story? She nodded slightly and continued the story herself. The family on the right was mocked by the family across, saying they could only lead such a life forever. However, an anomaly occurred to the right side family, who had been stepped on by humans. The eldest son, who was always crying from being stepped on by humans, had one more leaf grow, from 3 to 4, turning into a 4-leaf clover. Someone's bingo card seemed to be in a row, and shouts of bingo and applause erupted. She and I silently waited for a few seconds until the venue calmed down. Afterward, at the reading session, the reader, with a self-satisfied look, closed the book and spoke about the so-called moral of the story. All the good kids here, no matter how tough times they face, even if someone steps on them, if they live without giving up, their 3 leaves can become 4, and they can be happy. Hearing that, little me thought, what is he talking about? Oh, why? Because it's the humans who are happy, thinking that having an extra leaf is fortunate, not the wood sorrel, who finds a 4-leaf variant rare or a sign of good luck. I thought it was a story possibly made up by adults. When I said so, she made a displeased face. But why then? Why does it remain in your mind to the extent of becoming the design of a diner's coaster? When I asked back, she nodded strongly. Maybe because when I transferred schools in the middle of the first term in 8th grade, I was called Pua by you and everyone else here. Every day, being mocked by classmates, I suddenly remembered this story. And I could be content, realizing that even if the only environment available to me was poverty, and no matter how much I get stepped on by people, it's okay. But Michael, you thought when you were little that happiness from having 4 leaves was just adults' made-up story, right? Yes, and that hasn't changed. But if it's not happiness, is it unhappiness? She scrunched her nose, thinking deeply. I've never thought of myself as happy, but I haven't worried about being unhappy either. If it's neither happiness nor unhappiness, then what is it? Well, it's not unhappiness, I guess. Susan, the former class representative and now the organizer, announced the end of the reunion and the plan for the after-party. About 2/3 left after the main party due to various circumstances. We, still wanting to talk more, decided to join the after-party. The story of the wood sorrel, which becomes a 4-leaf due to harsh conditions, had slight differences in interpretation, but it was a mental support for both Mia and I during tough and painful times. Did you read that story in a book? She, too, had participated in a story reading session during her childhood. When I went, I remember, the reader, they had hair dyed in several colors. Were they wearing flashy colored leggings, like an old lady-like dude? Yes, exactly, someone like that. Though the venue was different, the story reading session we attended as children was by the same reader. As Mia and I were immersed in such a conversation, hey, point number 1 and number 2, you both look like you're not hurting. The guy who was beside Susan all along at the first party, clearly drunk, interrupted us. Immediately, Susan came to take him back. Come on, don't get carried away. Come back here, she said, pulling him away from us. I hear those two are getting married soon. I was slightly surprised and looked at Susan and her companion. I had fun. I'm so happy, meeting everyone. It's been a long time. That guy, he's just let bygones be bygones. Acts like he's got it good. When I murmured so, Mia leaned in and said, You know, Michael, what you said earlier about being neither unhappy nor happy, I think I get it, because I am no longer poor and unhappy like before. But I'm also not happy. Saying this, Mia took out a paper coaster with an illustration of a wood sorrel that she had brought from my shop. Why does this illustrated wood sorrel have only 3 leaves? Why didn't they draw it with 4? I felt caught off guard by her question. I didn't think about it. Why didn't I draw a 4-leaf illustration? As I thought seriously, with my arms crossed, she peered at me and said, Maybe you've never found a 4-leaf in clovers or wood sorrel. Then it hit me. No, I'm still looking for one, a 4-leaf. I raised my voice and looked at her. Then she created a radiant smile. Me too, I'm also looking for one. She gave me a warm look. I held her hand on the table and said, How about do it together? Shall we look for it together? Together, you and me. Yes, you and me. When I said this, instead of replying, she gripped my hand tightly. I thought to myself, even if the sun doesn't shine, no matter how muddy the path, I will walk this path further. Maybe, no, surely, together with her.